Hello. Hi everyone here, and then hi to the online audience at home too. Welcome to the Meeting House. If you haven't been here before, then welcome. We do lots of different events all around the radical history of the building and the local area, especially tied in with some of the people that we're associated with, for example, Mary Wollstonecraft. And so a lot of our programming here in the building celebrates these kind of stories, some of them often not told as much as we would like, and this event today is an example of this. I'm just going to do a bit of housekeeping. The toilet is through this door here. Please feel that you can pop in throughout the event. You won't be intruding at all. Izzy, behind us at the bar, sorry online viewers, you don't have access to the bar here. Izzy is going to be there throughout the evening, so please do, if you want to drink during the event, just get up and go. That's absolutely fine. If you have any issues throughout the event, there's myself and David, who is the volunteer at reception. Just let us know if you need anything. There's going to be time also during the event if you would like to ask the speakers questions and things like that. There'll be a microphone so that the online viewers can also contribute and hear you. Great, I think that's everything. Oh, I'm Amy, and I am the programme manager here of the Heritage Project at Newington Green Meeting House, which is owned and managed by New Unity. Right, well, I have the honour of introducing Sue, Jane and Sarah to talk about their time at the Grosvenor Avenue Feminist Commune and also their time when it came to the Miss World protest. So I will hand over.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you for organising us to get here. It's wonderful of you. We're kind of excited about the whole title of Revolutionary Ideas since 1708. We've lived here for 50-something years in this area and never been inside this building, and it's so beautiful. Isn't that shocking? And partly, the revolutionary ideas for us, we met, the three of us, in Cuba in '68, and we went there on a work brigade to support the Cuban Revolution that had started in '59. So we were digging holes to plant coffee in, getting up crack of dawn. Spent 6 weeks there. It was absolutely amazing. And some of the coffee we planted, I've been back since, and you can still see it growing, which is kind of exciting. It's probably different plants, but it was a really thrilling time to be there. And every evening we got people coming to talk to us about how they'd managed a revolution in 6 years, in a very short period of time, how hard it had been before the revolution, and how for women there was something about the revolution, within the revolution, that they were still seeing needed to happen, because it was a very machismo society at the beginning. So it was inspiring, exciting, wonderful, and anything seemed possible at the time. And I'm going to throw it to Jane to carry on.
All right. Well, I'm supposed to be talking about the context of Ruskin and the Commune. And let's start with '68, which was probably, it was a time of repression, resistance, and the promise of revolution in no uncertain terms. It was everywhere. Vietnam was at its height, and international resistance and demonstrations in response to that were going on. Martin Luther King's assassination had ended up in riots in numbers of cities in the States. The Black Panthers, who began in '66, I think, were growing very fast. In 1970, there were chapters in 68 cities in the States. I'm starting from the States. Women protested at the Miss America beauty contest in Atlantic City, very theatrically with a lot of humor, and it no doubt informed a lot of activities here as American left politics did at the time. In France, there was civil unrest and a unique alliance between workers and students, and the government almost came down. In the UK, there were student occupations at the LSE and at the Hornsey College of Art. There was the first, in Northern Ireland, there was the first civil rights march. And in England, Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech caused quite a reaction. The British Black Panther Party was founded in 68 in England, or they adopted it here. And women machinists at Ford struck, and that probably triggered the passing of the Equal Pay Act in 1970. We were really fired up when we came back from Cuba, and I mean really fired up. And I have to mention one thing that's very vivid in my memory, as well as going to work in the hills every day to plant, along with coffee, precious wood, which would be a more sustaining feature of Cuban economy. We'd go up there with North Vietnamese people who were on rest and recreation from the war. They'd still be working. And we'd also watch films with them in the open air, and one of the most moving experiences was watching Battle of Algiers with North Vietnamese on the hills in Cuba outside. Has everyone seen Battle of Algiers? Yeah, it's difficult to... If you don't know what I'm talking about, scream, or say something. Anyway, when we came back, Sarah, who'd been to art college, joined a group called Poster Workshop, who did silkscreen posters for radical causes on request. I'd been to film school for a year and joined Cinema Action, which was a political film collective. And Sarah and Sue, although they can't work out if they met each other there or saw each other there, were at the banned Civil Rights March in Northern Ireland. There were demos and arrests were inevitable, so that we were getting into the law, defending ourselves and defending each other. Our activism was either in solidarity with other people, or it arose out of the situation in which we found ourselves. And the tactic we used was often direct action. Occasionally, we did ask ourselves, or I certainly asked myself, where do I fit into the revolution of other people? But that question would go away. It would drift in and out of my consciousness. Anyway, at some point, we heard that there was going to be a women's liberation conference at Ruskin College in Oxford. And we're really excited about going. I had some apprehension, because I'd always heard from male left-wing friends that a women's movement would be divisive. But we went, and I think that thought evaporated pretty quickly. There were 600 women there, some kids and men. The men manned the creche. And the diversity of the activism women were involved in, and the way women talked and discussed with each other, well, it was exhilarating, and it was life-changing for all of us. So, after that, we formed with other women a women's group. There were a few women's groups in '69, but after Ruskin, they just swelled in numbers. They proliferated all over England, and they worked in collaboration with the Women's Liberation Workshop in London, but in a very autonomous way, in a kind of federalist way, coming together over conferences. Consciousness raising was a big part of women's groups then, most of the women's groups. And I, for one, wasn't sure what it was, how to recognize it, how to do it. But once we started talking, it became apparent, and we were doing it. And we were sharing things that we hadn't shared with women before, and suddenly understood the origins of it in social terms, what it meant to be a woman. And there was a lot of joy in that, certainly a lot of solidarity in that, but there was also a lot of sadness for the times we'd missed, as it were, talking to each other. We saw how we were kind of wired, but also complicit in judging each other on how we looked, how we spoke, what we represented, on everything. And these were standards that we had no choice in creating. So we were angry, to say the least, but also realized that anger was a kind of source of, well, it was a legitimate source of revolutionary change. So as we were from Cuba very impatient, we were impatient again to change the world. Just one other thing, sorry. Yeah, we had confidence in the revolutionary potential of anger, and in understanding the sources of our oppression, we also understood and had a sort of fiercer solidarity with other groups. We went on to write we went on to do one of the issues of Shrew, which was the magazine of the Women's Liberation Workshop, and was shared in production around the country. And fairly soon, some of us, 4 of us from the women's group, decided to live in a commune, and that turned out to be in Grosvenor Avenue. But why we decided to was we wanted to take forward the momentum of what we were discovering in consciousness raising. Yes, we wanted to make the revolution, but unless we were able to confront and change the kind of things that made us behave in certain ways, jealousy, possessiveness, judging, competitiveness, you know what I'm talking about. If we weren't able to change those things, and I think the concept of the new man in Cuba, I'm not sure he was talking about this, but that's what we thought this was about, creating the person you knew who could only live in a freedom. Anyway, we wanted both outside and inside revolution. We also thought if we lived in a commune together, we could organize better as women, and also we were desperate for a place to live. So that's where I'll leave that.
Can I just ask, does anybody know where Grosvenor Avenue is? Yeah, everybody. It's like 5 minutes walk from
Just
here,
around the corner.
on the other end of Newington Green.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Over to me.
Mic up.
Oh, beg your pardon. Is it on? It's turned on, is it? I'm not very good on mics, I'm afraid.
Just hear yourself.
Yeah, well, can you? Anyway, so I think the Ruskin Conference was in January or February of 1970. And in the autumn, about September, I think, there was a proposal 2 women made that we could demonstrate against the Miss World contest, which was coming up in November and was held every year. And it was a huge event. There wasn't much to watch on television. There were only 2 channels. And on that night, I think the other channel didn't try and compete. And it had more watchers, more viewers across the world than the World Cup, because, of course, there were 65 contestants. And so all their countries watched. And these 2 women, Jan Williams and Hazel Twort, who were in Peckham, suggested this. They'd done an excellent paper at the Ruskin thing called the Politics of the Family. And this seemed a great idea. So the first meeting was held in Victoria, I think, and I went down to that. The others were kind of busy. And we were disappointed. There were only 5 of us there, and 1 person left early. But we thought, well, even 5 people can be disruptive, because the plan was to go inside. There had been demonstrations outside the Albert Hall in previous years, but nobody had ever actually gone in and tried to disrupt it live on air. So we thought, well, we can get tickets up in the gods, which are not expensive, and we can throw leaflets and all sorts of things down from there and be disruptive. And I suggested we had the next meeting at Grosvenor Avenue, which was the sort of house that, ever-open house that people drifted in and out of, for better or worse. And I said more people will probably come, and they did. Lots more people came. It mushroomed after that. And everything spread by word of mouth. In those days, everything did, unless you had posters, because we didn't have a telephone. There was a long waiting list for a telephone. No mobile phones, of course, no internet, nothing, no social media. So it was by word of mouth, but that also made it quite clandestine, not deliberately, but, you know, the authorities didn't know what was being planned. So we had long discussions which got more and more exciting about what we would use, football, rattles, whistles, water pistols filled with water or perhaps ink, and lots and lots and lots of leaflets, which we printed in Grosvenor Avenue, because we had a printing press in the basement, a little printing press. And the leaflet said, which is up here, Sue's idea. Sue came up with it first, but we are not...
Beautiful, we're not angry, we're ugly. I'm sorry.
We always get it the wrong way round. Just read it up there. We're not
beautiful, we're not ugly, we're angry.
Yep. And we also had smoke bombs, which we bought from theatrical shops and could be lit with a cigarette. And you could smoke anywhere in those days. I don't know how many, I can't see the age group, and you're probably all different, but you could even smoke in aeroplanes, and cigarettes, cigars, everything. And the place was filled with smoke. So the idea was to have a lit cigarette and light your smoke bomb and throw it onto the stage. And we made stink bombs from a recipe that was used in the anti-Vietnam War campaign for recruiting officers in the States. And the odd rotten tomato and other things. And then at one point somebody said, because different people came and people we didn't know heard about it, and then somebody said, do you realise the first half of the evening is pre-recorded the day before and it's not live? And so we were all horrified and said, oh my God, and so how will we know for sure when to start? So we had a lot of discussion about that, and I said, well, I suggest we have one person who gives a starting signal when they know it's a good moment. So everybody said, oh, that's a good idea, you do that. So I was kind of landed with it. There's another Sarah who lived in the Commune, and she and I were given the job, and two women there had 2 seats right down in the stalls near the stage, ideally situated, and they said, well, you have those 2 seats. So we took those 2 tickets. And the night before, so there was a huge amount of planning, and a lot of people were demonstrating outside, but we had to avoid them because we didn't want to be recognised as we went in. But there were women's groups, they were the biggest number, and young liberals and anti-apartheid people, and as organised by Peter Hain, which you might have read about, but and the GLF, yes, and the GLF, and then we had a problem about dressing, because everybody's terribly smart there, and we were very scruffy, and we were anti-property. We were a bit extreme at that time, as were many people, and so we shared all our clothes. But people who came and passing through the house were a bit prone to pick up the nicest clothes and put them on and then leave. So we were always left with the worst clothes. We realised after a while. So anyway, we managed to fix ourselves up with basically overcoats, relatively decent overcoats that covered whatever we wore underneath. And we went there in dribs and drabs, because obviously we weren't going to go there in a group. But the night before, there was a bomb somebody put a bomb underneath the BBC van outside the Albert Hall. And this was in the Evening Standard paper the following afternoon. And we were absolutely appalled and thought we might have to, we discussed whether we should cancel what we were doing. And then we thought, if we don't go, we've lost everything we've planned. And if we do, the worst that can happen if we go is that they find what we've got in our bags and don't let us in, possibly might charge us, but might just turn us away. So we went, and amazingly, there were no searching. People didn't search bags in those days, even on that night. So in we went with our football rattles and all our clobber. And we then had to sit, and we sat surrounded by women in ermine coats and men in tuxedos and bow ties and everybody in evening dress, and we sat there sort of not wanting to look too po-faced, but not being able to enjoy it either. And it went on forever. And we were very near the judges, and I was sort of looking down at the judges, and my plan was to run down with my water pistol after giving the starting signal and spray all the judging papers. So we sat through all of this, and the women were brought out, first in national costumes, then they went away, then they came back out again in long dresses, slinky dresses, and then they went back in again, and they came out wearing bikini, not bikini swimming costumes, but tightly fitting, and sort of their backs arched and their breasts sticking out, because they're measured, they're statistics, and the statistics were read out for each contestant. So, big bums, big tits, and narrow waists, basically. And then they had to turn around and show their bums to the judges and to the whole audience, and everybody else sitting there dressed up to the nines, and they are there just in minimal clothing. And anyway, so then they were put away, and Bob Hope came out over from the States to entertain the crowd. And he would take, he bragged and he strutted about the place, and his jokes were extremely unfunny, and even the audience began to fall a bit silent. And he said he loved cattle markets, which was one of the criticisms of a beauty contest, that it was like a cattle market. And he said, I like to go, I've been round the back, I like to go round the back feeling the calves. And I love all women. And he said he'd take the fortunate winner to Vietnam at Christmas so she could be paraded in front of the GIs fighting the Vietnamese. And he said she will give them the hots, all the better to fight the Kong. And he sort of went, it was appalling. He went on and on. And Sarah and I decided it was the time to go. So we got up, we slid out of our seats and started the football rattle. And I sort of went down towards the judges. And nothing happened. I was turning the rattle and turning the rattle. And I felt like the general who's been abandoned by the troops. But in fact, I learned later that they were, we'd been there for so long, everybody was spread out and their stuff out of their bags, and they had to put things away and light their cigarettes and get the smoke bomb ready. So they took what seemed an interminable amount of time to actually launch. But then it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And smoke bombs went off, whistles were being blown, all at the acoustics are great in the Albert Hall, and people were on every side and on every level, and leaflets were showering down from the top. I don't remember stink bombs particularly, but certainly smoke bombs and leaflets and whistles and noise and shouting and banners. Some people had taken in big banners, women's liberation banners. But for me, that was the end of my participation, because I got grabbed from behind by a big burly security man, so I never made it to the judges' table. And I was carried out and put in a room with three others, Sarah also, and Sally Alexander, who was in another spot with another woman. And we were locked in a room until about midnight. And we could see, we drew attention to ourselves to all the people outside demonstrating. When they knew that we were being held there, they refused to leave until we'd been released. And so I think in the end they got fed up with us about midnight. I mean, everything was quiet by then, and they threw us out. And we sort of made our way home in dribs and drabs. Some people went on to a nightclub where, not to go into, that's where they took the women after the contest, because they resumed afterwards and continued, but we were not interested in what happened afterwards. We'd succeeded. Brilliant, we thought, in what we'd done. A few people got arrested at the nightclub, some women who'd gone down to protest. And we didn't see images of what we'd done for years, I think, because there was no YouTube that we had, there was no sort of recording on the TV. We didn't have a TV anyway. And I think for me, anyway, it only gradually sank in what we'd done, except it was all over the newspapers and all across the world. And Someone told me that in Australia they showed it the next day because it was the wrong time. So they could have cut out our demonstration, but by then everybody had read about it in the newspaper and was expecting to see it and would have been outraged, so the BBC didn't dare cut it out, apparently. So it was shown everywhere. And so we felt we'd really succeeded in what we did. And it did, I mean, it drew the world's attention to the fact there was a women's movement. And it made people start thinking, and a lot of people we heard actually later said that was what made me become a feminist. Well, people said my mother said that and things like that. So that was very gratifying, really. So I think that's about my bit.
I just want to reassure you that we're going to just talk for half the time we've got. I think you can probably hear without.
No, it's for the YouTube.
We're only going to talk for about half the time we've got, I promise you. And please ask questions if you want to as we go. Otherwise, there'll be like half the time to ask questions at the end. Can I read out something I found, which was from Mary Wollstonecraft? I don't think we knew about Mary Wollstonecraft much at the time, but because, you know, she opened a school around here and made such a difference and has her sculpture in the park. She wrote in Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792 that women taught from their infancy that beauty is women's sceptre. The mind shapes itself to the body, roaming around its gilt cage, only seeks to adorn its prison. And I think we came to the same conclusion with our slogan for the protest. That was really, really very interesting to read and understand that this is a long, long, long struggle. So I think we're going to do the clips next.
No, we're going to talk about being bumped down the stairs.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Don't you think we want to see the clips?
Yeah.
All right. I want to see the clips.
It is the clips.
I think so. Is that okay? Thank you, Stephen.
It's going to be well above us.
Yeah, we could.
And we must preserve
Bob Hope, obviously.
The proceedings have been temporarily suspended. The interruption, I'll welcome that it is to the organisers, isn't altogether unexpected. One or two people managed to get onto the stage. At the back of the amphitheatre, there were some demonstrators. They started rattling, and then they blew whistles, and then one or two of them managed to get through, which was quite an achievement because the security here has been extremely tight.
No, but I would say that about two.
This is from the feature film.
Just trying to
Thanks. So that was seen by 100 million people around the world, the demonstration. But the clip, obviously the second one, was from the film Misbehaviour. I don't know if anybody managed to see that. You did? So it came out 2 days before the cinemas closed for COVID. So it was kind of unlucky launch. It was on telly the other night, so it's on iPlayer now, isn't it? BBC iPlayer. Along with a documentary after it as well. So 10 days later, I had my daughter, my first daughter, because I was 9 months pregnant at the time. So I'd managed to stuff leaflets and flower bombs under my enormous coat that wrapped over my enormous belly, went up to the very top floor at Albert Hall and dropped it all down when Sarah gave the signal. So we called her Wild because we lived in a commune and we wanted the kids to grow up wild. And then the next child was born, and that was a Wild as well. So now there's apparently hundreds of Wilds around. People took up the idea of it not being always your father's name that you get. Yes, please.
So that I was a friend of some of the Wilds who grew up in 29, but I now live around the corner in Petherton Road. And me and my partner have both come from the same sort of feminist anarchist traditions. And we also gave our daughter the surname Wild in 2008. So there is a Wild living in Newington Green as we speak.
Fantastic. That's thrilling to hear. Yeah. It's really interesting. Sam, who was the youngest of the children at Grosvenor Avenue, organised a reunion. I think he got 100 Wilds there, but there's so many more never come across. That's fabulous. Wow. Yeah, so what did we do afterwards is the question. We kind of worried that it hadn't made enough of a difference, I think. We all went on to do different things. At Grosvenor Avenue, we'd set up a nursery when the children came along in the ground floor, and for all the children in the street, quite a lot of children came. I absolutely loved working there. So from there, I went and helped set up a community nursery in Broadway Market, just a couple of other parents, and we got some money by demonstrating on Hackney Town Hall steps. What was then the GLC, the Greater London Council, gave us a house. And that nursery's still there. It's open in Pownell Road, and it's run by a social enterprise now. But it's, I guess, it started in 75, so it's been going quite a long time. Almost 45 years, I think. And then I set up a nursery for Hackney Council, and we called it the Mary Wollstonecraft Children's Centre. It was in Hoxton, because we wanted to remind everyone and never to forget that Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote such amazing books and changed so many things, had actually opened up a school here. And also just the importance of education in changing the way we can move towards changing the world, and the role women play in that. So we went squatting some of us went squatting after we left Grosvenor Avenue, got flats together, and I've never really moved very far from here. Jane hasn't moved at all.
No, well, I moved out of Grosvenor Avenue, Dalston. So after the protest, just to go back, it was fairly easy to pick us off in the Albert Hall. I was kind of plucked and dragged up some stairs towards the exit of the auditorium, and I went limp, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor, and there were feet walking over me. So I was actually left in the hall and kind of couldn't do anything but go back to my seat and continue protesting. So I went back for a kind of encore, and then I was removed efficiently. I had no knowledge of who was detained until I got back to Grosvenor Avenue, and I didn't have any knowledge until later that there were 5 arrests made. I won't mention much about the trial now of the 5 people, because it was really, you might want to discuss, ask questions about it after, but there's some pretty good accounts of it in this book, which we're selling at a knockdown price of £10. And there's some wonderful cartoons in it by people the 2 people who were, of us 5, who were on trial, actually aren't here tonight, but they've certainly contributed to the book and the cartoons about the trial. But it was remarkably funny, theatrical, and there were protests outside. There were supporters inside the building, outside the courtroom, and inside the courtroom. And at one point it was pandemonium, but I'll leave you to ask questions or to read about it. After the trial, we were still in Grosvenor Avenue, we, with other women, produced the women's newspaper, the first issue of which was in time for the first International Women's Day March in London in 1971. After that, some of us wrote the Why Miss World pamphlet to explain why we did it, and it's kind of very good on the beauty industry, as well as to talk about, we'll reflect on shortcomings of the protests, like there was a lot of publicity shy attitude, the press are always awful, don't talk to them, well, we just were kind of at a disadvantage because we were misrepresented and all that. The only paper that really did good reporting about us was the Morning Star, and there were some good articles there. Myself, eventually, when I left Grosvenor Avenue, I wanted more structure, I wanted a job, and I went to work in the London Ambulance Service. I thought I was very kind of strategic. I wanted to work in a big public sector job, NHS, in a job that had few women still. So there would be gender, there'd be employment issues, and where things were beginning to hot up in terms of industrial action. I hadn't counted on the sexism, which was rife, really rife, but the main thing is I absolutely loved the National Health Service. I don't know whether it was Dr. Kildare, all the kind of medical dramas I grew up with, but the first time I entered a hospital, I felt at home, and to this day, I love the kind of culture, the congeniality, you know what I mean? The community of it is extraordinary from every role you meet, and the fact that you're contributing in some small way to the care people are getting is very satisfying. But I didn't last, a couple of years I lasted, and after that, with other feminists, I decided to train as a midwife. And at that time, again from the States in 1968, Our Bodies, Ourselves was published. And this was really important worldwide to the women's movements, women's health movements, but it really was politically really important. It really privileged women's experiences, women's knowledge. It pushed the idea of women supporting each other, and it put women in the center of their care. Well, the maternity services in the 70s, and I wonder now, were not like that. Women were not the center of their care. It wasn't woman-centered in the least. And so the Association of Radical Midwives was born, and we campaigned for women-centered services, in education, women's rights, and also about the midwifery profession itself. So that made training, which was an eye-opener, bearable. In my career, which was in practice as well as education, and later when I had a life-changing bike accident. It was in research, but the work I really enjoyed was supporting women to kind of navigate their through the care system, through birth and into early motherhood. More recently, I was campaigning with medical justice about the detention of pregnant asylum seekers in immigration detention centers and campaigning to end that practice. So, Sarah?
So this is what happened afterwards.
Yeah, not looking back on it.
Yeah, this is my life afterwards, basically. Sorry, I did tell you. 5 minutes. Okay. Well, I don't have a lot. We were already helping a lot, and I continued. Homeless families, we squatted them in empty council houses, which at the time, streets of them would be left for redevelopment or God knows what, but they'd sometimes be left there for years. And so you sort of broke in and reconnected the electricity and the water. And we had a van, and we used to rehouse people. Then I worked in Troops Out of Ireland a lot, because I was already quite involved with Ireland. Firstly, having gone on the Civil Rights March from Belfast to Derry, to Dublin, a solidarity march with the civil rights movement in the north of Ireland. And I had gone as a member of Poster Workshop when we were asked by the People's Democracy to send somebody over to make posters in Free Belfast and Free Derry when they were burnt down and occupied. They put barricades up in 1969. And I was over there for about 6 weeks in Belfast and then in Derry. So I had been already quite involved with all of that. And and then later I had a friend who organised the march from Wales to Greenham Common to protest about the fact that cruise missiles were being brought over by the States. And I went on that march and I did drawings on it. It was a 9-day march. And nobody was interested. The press took no notice. And I went to London afterwards and rang the press, because, again, we had no telephones. And the press were completely uninterested. And they sort of said, Greenham Common, what's that? Where? No, that's not a story. Thank you very much. So that's what began. The women chained themselves to the fence of Greenham Common, and it grew into a big camp, of which Sue had a big part, I think, or went down a lot. I later moved to France quite soon after that, where I was involved with women's groups supporting Algerian women who'd had to flee from the Islamic fundamentalists. And we also opposed a uranium mine, an open-cast uranium mine in a very windy region that was going to be made, but it wasn't made for various reasons. So I think that's about it, really.
Do you want to have a break? Get a drink? Buy a book? We've probably got enough. We've probably got about, it's £10 as opposed to 15. We've probably got about 15 minutes more between us. That still leaves half an hour for questions.
And you've got 15 minutes more to talk about?
No, but between us.
I've got about 3 minutes.
Oh, I thought we were running out of time.
Yeah, we are.
I haven't been
All right. Is it all right to start? Okay. All right, just to finish off, we're going to kind of very briefly look back on what it all means and stuff. And in 2019, 5 major beauty titles were won by black women. And this was celebrated on Twitter among young black women. And soon after that, Misbehaviour, the film, came out, which notably celebrated the winning by Miss Grenada of the title, as well as the runner-up being Miss South Africa, or Miss Africa South. Yeah, because there were 2 that year. So this led me to wonder, with so much emphasis on the black winner, what I would have felt about a black woman winning in 1970. Did I care? Well, not much. There might have been a buzz, about, to anti-apartheid, the white establishment. But did I care? No. Beauty contests exploited and objectified all women, wherever they were from, whatever their skin color. They were used to endorse products that promised beauty. We transform ourselves if we use their products. They were used, beauty contests endorsed the homogenized standards of beauty. And can a competition based on appearance ever be good? We had wondered when we were organizing, and thought maybe beauty contests offer opportunities to people women who wouldn't have had them otherwise. But what were these opportunities? Being groped or worse, raped by sponsors, going to Vietnam with Bob Hope as a death mascot for US troops, a relatively small check for a year's hard work, a career in modeling or the promise of it. And what about the losers? Pearl, who came second, she lost her job when she went back to South Africa. Her parents lost their jobs because they assumed a runner-up would have a big prize package. She had nothing. Her life was worse when she went back, having been second.
She had 25 years of apartheid.
Yes, yeah. But anyway, in hindsight, what was wrong with these assumptions? Well, the assumptions that our preconceptions and concerns were shared by every woman, for a start. Women's liberation at that time was really middle class and predominantly white. We continued to show solidarity with black people resisting police harassment and communities that were under attack. And we knew that black women were organizing among themselves, but we made little effort to kind of connect up with them, and that was reciprocal. Would it have made any difference if we'd had any black women in our women's group, or if more black women, I think there was one involved with the Miss World protest. I mean, would it have introduced us any earlier to the notion of intersectionality, which didn't really come into parlance until 1989. Working as a midwife, really, I learned about other women's lives, about commonalities and differences related to class, sexuality, disability, race, and the impact of these on health, expectations, and choices. But perhaps even more importantly to this discussion, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, 1970, laid bare the impact of racism on a young girl who came to see her dark skin and mannerisms as ugly and longed to be white, hence the title, The Bluest Eyes. Homogeneous or homogeneous standards of beauty in the beauty industry and beauty competitions have been shamelessly white European. Women of color winning in the past usually meant her features conformed to these standards. This is why there were black beauty contests, where the signifiers of blackness, skin color, and hair were on show and celebrated. So whether a competition based on women's appearance can ever be good remains, but it's clear that a win can mean different things to women, and for some may even represent some form of restitution of sorts, however small, however transient. That's me.
So our question for all of us, I think we'd really love to hear your thoughts, is what did it change? 50 years after that Miss World demonstration, still the same continuum of violence between women being judged by how we look, rape, femicide, and violence against women. 50 years after we protested, 2 to 3 women are killed by men each week in England and Wales. Many more women live in fear. The number of reported rapes is rising. Convictions are falling. Just 1.4% of reported rapes resulted in any kind of charge against the perpetrator in England and Wales in 2020, a record low. Tiny proportion of those charges, less than 7%, resulted in conviction. There's still widespread violence against women across the world, lives ruined by FGM, ended by dowry and so-called honour killings. And the Miss World contest carries on. We didn't even manage to stop it. We did stop it being live television because they didn't have it live after that. International Women's Day, we've just celebrated it, and we celebrate it every year, but it's not enough at the moment. The only optimism I find is going backwards in time to a historian called Gerda Lerner, who argued in her book, The Creation of Patriarchy, in 1986, that system of patriarchy is a historic construct. It has a beginning, it will have an end. Time seems nearly to have run its course. No longer services the needs of men or women. In its inextricable linkage to militarism, hierarchy and racism, threatens the very existence of life on Earth. So what's changed since 1970? We think not enough, but we'd love to hear what you think. Please ask. Or say what you think. Over to you.
Can you tell us a bit about... Hello. Can you tell us a bit about the trial, what people were charged with? Where was the court, and did they get off, or did they end up with a criminal record? What was the outcomes?
So, Bow Street Magistrates Court, 5 women. One got off because she'd been watching the Miss World contest on television and had run down to join the protest. And she'd sworn at a policeman who tried to stop her joining the demonstration. And that got thrown out early. Three of the women defended themselves, following along from the kind of suffragists who did the same thing. And they were amazing. The court was packed every day. That was as much of a demonstration in some ways, because the women called the magistrate daddy, and they asked the police witnesses who washed their socks. They just had a riot, and it did end up in fines, but the Women's Liberation Workshop raised the money and paid the fines. So, assault, affray, threatening behaviour. But now, when you look at the clip and you see a water pistol being sprayed, you think now that that woman would have been shot, brought to the ground. We don't know. Nobody quite believed it was happening, that somebody would be squirting a water pistol. But now you think we were kind of lucky in some ways. It was a very different era.
Mm.
Yeah. I think had learned from, in that trial, had been learning, because had been the Chicago 7 and then the Mangrove 9 trials, where people had defended themselves with amazing effect. And I think it probably had as much impact in some ways as the demonstration, the court case. It was really breaking ground at the time.
I think it made a big difference to the movement. That's something I think that the movement thinks of as having been more groundbreaking in a way. Yeah.
I think also people defending themselves, if they have the confidence or the groundwork or the support or solidarity with others in or out of the court, they make a much better case for their own defence than lawyers who don't really dare. They're terrified of this, they're terrified of that, they're terrified of getting barred. The defendants go, they go their whole hog. They might get scolded, but they're not going to lose their career or whatever. So it's actually a much more effective defence if they put a good case together.
How long was the trial?
A week?
I think it was about 4 days over a weekend. There was and there was one night in Holloway when there was so much disruption, the judge lost it. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I'm just interested to know, I mean, I know you said that it was felt afterwards, or that it drew loads of people into sort of the feminist movement. Was there a kind of arguments and divisions about taking direct action at that time? Were there people who thought this kind of thing was too extreme for the feminist scene at the time, or was that generally everyone was up for it, or was there kind of moderates and radicals in that sense?
No, everyone seemed to like it. Yeah, there didn't seem to be any question about, oh, we couldn't do that, or, no, not at all. The main thing was that people wanted to be clear we weren't attacking the women, either with words or with weapons,
The women contestants, that is, yeah. I think we got a very bad press. I mean, there was, the Daily Mail was on about, yes.
Well, yeah.
Hairy lesbians, bother girls kind of headlines,
Did they say
Yeah, exactly.
Did you have any contact post the Miss World contest with any of the contestants? Did you have any dialogue with them, or reach out to have any dialogue with any of them? Was that possible?
Well, when Sally Alexander was towed away, lifted off by policemen, and the person she was with were taken off, I think Miss Venezuela or someone said, please don't hurt them, but no, the only contact with contestants was more recently, when there was a kind of reunion of the contestants, Pearl and Jennifer Houston, whatever her name, Hostin, coming to London, so we met them then, yeah.
But we met them at the premiere of the film. It was really fascinating because we tried so hard to get them to write something for the book, the Misbehaving book. But Jennifer Hostin, Miss Grenada, she wrote her own book, and she became a diplomat for Grenada. And Pearl, who was wonderful, if anybody saw that documentary, she calls herself a feminist. She's become the Dionne Warwick of the township where she lives. She sings. She's just fabulous, and she sang at the premiere, which was glorious. So it was really lovely meeting them and thinking that we could. We all have different views about the film, but I really liked the film, and I particularly liked it because we saw through the contestants' eyes. But at the time, we were like, we had no way to even know who they were or to find them afterwards. We didn't. It's so hard to imagine now, isn't it? How would you get hold of people who lived in other countries? We didn't have. As Sarah already said, there were no mobiles. There was no way we could have any contact. We just couldn't figure it out. So it was one of the good things about the film, I think, was seeing in the round from everybody's point of view.
But and I'd sort of say we'd made our point, we'd had our demonstration, and we sort of moved on to do all sorts of different things, and we'd never intended to make contact with the contestants and ask them why they were doing it. I don't think it occurred to us, basically. And it was only when the film was made and the reunion programme on Radio 4, did they have Jennifer Hostin there? I can't remember, on the radio.
She was on it, but not Pearl.
Because that was what gave the idea for the film, apparently, hearing that. The people then decided they'd make a film about it. So Jennifer Hostin was there then, so a couple of us who were, not of us, but a couple of others, the two missing ones, basically, met Jennifer Hostin then. But it was more around the reunion and a pre-showing of the film where we really met each other. Oh, we were on the one show, weren't we? With Jennifer Hostin. But I noticed they kept her separate. We were never together. I think they were afraid of fisticuffs, but we'd actually got on quite well. I got on very well with her daughter, who had worked in Sri Lanka where I grew up, and we talked a lot. I really liked her. But anyway, I think the one show thought we might end up fighting or throwing smoke bombs, or I don't know what they thought.
Also, they put Jennifer Hostin in makeup, and we didn't. we didn't get the makeup treatment. I really wish they had been part of the book, though. I think it would have been interesting.
Yes. But Pearl was ill. She might have done it, but she's been very ill.
Thank you. It was mentioned that you each have views about the film. Could you just briefly share those views with us? Do you want to start?
Right. I was very disappointed with it. I think me and Joe were two of the first people to see it in an editing room, and we were sinking low. They'd given us a whole box of cakes to eat. We were kind of sinking lower and lower in our seat, stuffing cakes into our mouth. And I found bits of it funny, you know, but I found the representation of the movement really impossible, in pretty much the same way as in the States, people have found Mrs. America not helpful, you know. And also the conspiracy film that was recently on Netflix, the Chicago 8, should be 9 or whatever, without Bobby Seale. It's very difficult to do a dramatic representation of a political event that have a lot of vested interests in the so-called truth being told. They were always going to try and knit 4 themes together: women's liberation, the contestants, Bob Hope, and Morley. So there were 4 stories. And I guess I wanted it to be more about the movement, you know. So it was, I can see how this has turned on young people to the event, maybe other people who, anyway, whoever it's turned on. But I worry sometimes that these representations of historical events become history, you know, and that's my concern. So I was very disappointed, but I realized my initial response is, you know, pretty tied to passions about film and what they should do, yeah.
Well, I love the film. The first time I saw it, I went with trepidation. 2 of us went. They took us in 2 at a time, the filmmakers, to see it, like Noah's Ark. But and we were fearful we might not like it because Joe and Jane had come away rather unhappy about it. But so we were very happy we did like it. But there were parts that were difficult because I didn't realise they would give so much time to the contestants. I hadn't, although apparently they had warned us about that. But I thought it was going to be above all about our action, and sort of rather egotistically thinking it was about the women's movement. But in fact, I think it made it appeal to a much wider audience, having all those different strands. And I think older women find it more difficult because they lived through that period of the early women's movement and look at it more critically, if you like. But it was never meant to be a film about. It's not a documentary. It was made as a film of entertainment, so it does slightly gloss over the politics, but I think it has tremendous energy and verve and is really enjoyable. And young women have loved it. Nearly all the ones we've spoken to loved it, apparently.
I mean, I think it's fair to say the director would see herself as a feminist, and she consulted with us, came to visit us. The scriptwriter was great. They really fought to make it happen, the film. I liked it. There was a problem in that they tried to make a kind of antagonism between... They picked out 2 women to be the ones who the film would concentrate on. They couldn't manage to make it as a kind of a collective. And once they'd done that, then they needed to create a dramatic antagonism, and that's just always really irritating. But having said that, I mean, it reached a wide, it could have reached a wide audience if it had been in cinemas. But I think it's true that, like my daughters who are 40 and 50 now, really loved it. And that, I think, made me see it through their eyes, that actually it was a lot of fun. And it gave a message, it ends with, and the struggle against the patriarchy continues. So there's, it does manage to put some points across, as you could see from the clip. But, they always do that antagonism between the two main characters thing. They don't have to do that. I wish they wouldn't. So, on balance, great, I thought.
And Leslie Manville as Mrs. Bob Hope is wonderful. Wonderful. Withering. Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. And also the Morley, the woman who plays Mrs. Morley, when she's getting Bob Hope back on the stage, she said, "Oh, you're so brave." Taps him on the back.
Having held on to his ankle to stop him leaving in the first place.
Yes, he apparently tried to run away, we learned, and she grabbed him by the ankle and wouldn't let him flee. Because he'd been bragging about going to Vietnam and, always strutting the stuff and whatever. But Keira Hawes, who played Mrs. Morley, she was hilarious. I mean, she's lovely. And I loved the bit at the end when she sort of says to her husband, it was a blow against the patriarchy, they said, or something. And he said, "What's that?" And she said, "It's you, dear." And she said it was a triumph for us or something. There were a lot of great lines in it in the film. I think they made a lot of good points with great humour.
But it is the reason that we thought we should do a book, because we imagined that the film wouldn't reflect the reality, and we wanted to make sure the stories of as many women as possible who took part were there. I think there were about 20. We kind of contacted through every way we could think of. We emailed friends and organisations to say, if you're at the Miss World demonstration, do you want to be part of writing something? And lots of women responded and drew things, and it was interesting. And the director and the writer also wrote something in it, because they were kind of passionate about it. Actually, they took 10 years to get the funding for it.
Oh, they put so much time and effort into it, and then the cinemas closed 2 days after it came out.
Particularly Rebecca Frayne, who was the main script writer. She was the one who was really working on it for 8 years. Yeah.
Being Bob Hope's mate and sort of actor colleague, Bing Crosby, was found out to have been an abusive husband to his wife. I mean, how did you feel about that fact that Bob Hope was a mate to an abuser, and how did that shape your view of Miss World with that revelation?
I grew up with Bob Hope. It didn't affect that. I mean, those of us who knew him from, say, living in the States, disliked him just for what he represented. Didn't know so much about him being abusive or philandering or whatever you want to call it. That wouldn't be a reason to be.
But I mean, his mate, Bing Crosby, was found to have been abusive. Bing Crosby was found to be abusive, but he was also a mate of Bob Hope. Did you?
I'm not sure we knew enough at the time about him, excepting that he made the most sexist, horrible jokes, and he was, in a way, the film taught us more about his life than we knew already, I suspect. He was way out of anything that we knew about, really.
I don't know that we even knew he was going to be there. I mean, we were. I don't know how many of us watched the show in previous years, or. I just remember the women, and we were focused on the way the women were treated. It was a cattle market, And I don't know if Bob Hope was brought in at the last minute, rather, because Michael Aspel in the documentary rather implied that he should have been doing all of that stuff, and suddenly they flew in Bob Hope from overseas. But I don't think we were really interested in, but it was decades before the Me Too movement, and you know, none of these sleazy men had been exposed, unfortunately, at that stage. And you know, if it was reported by any women, the women were usually sidelined or treated badly or fired or whatever.
The terrible thing was it was in every home. I mean, we watched it as kids. It was kind of enforced watching to watch the Miss World contest. It's like
Family viewing.
family viewing, exactly. Yeah.
I wanted to maybe touch on what you just said about children watching the programme at home, and maybe that leads into how things maybe have changed, in that Miss World does still exist, but it's not really an acceptable part of mass culture now in a way that it was in the 70s. And so I think there are, you know, things have got better, but not enough, I suppose. And it is maybe too much to ask of one demo to completely overturn the patriarchy, but you know, it is overturning the patriarchy. It will be made up of lots of things like that, I guess, which isn't a question, but I suppose you seem quite down on the fact that you'd not achieved this monumental thing, and I'm wondering if there is an opportunity for you to maybe reflect on some of the positive things that what you did may have led to as well.
That's so lovely. Thank you. Sorry, do you want to say something else? Can we end there? That's so perfect.
Hi, so we're in Stoke Newington, on the edge of, and I think you alluded very briefly there to the Angry Brigade bomb the day before, and Astrid Prohl was hiding out near here as well, and I'm just really curious about the circles you moved in and the people you knew and what it must have been like. And I know you said that these days you...
Are you a police informer?
I'm trying to... Because you said, you know, you couldn't do it today, you know, because you'd have been shot before you got to the stage. But there was a lot going on then, wasn't there? It was a pretty heavy time for a lot of people, right? Yeah. And Stoke Newington, when you're walking down Church Street, it's just blows my mind to think what in terms of counterculture, how it used to be. What was it like? What were your lives like at that period?
Well, it was very run down in this area. There wasn't much happening, as I recollect. There was a wonderful shop, that's probably not here or there, but that I liked very much on the road a bit further down beyond Grosvenor Avenue. It was a Turkish shop, and it was sort of like wholesale, but they just get certain things in. At one stage, they'd got in a great load of watermelons, which were like a great mountain inside. It was just a shop the size, it wasn't a big building. And the previous delivery, I think, had been chandeliers made out of glass. So the ceiling was covered in chandeliers, and then there was this mountain of watermelons below. And I still remember that wonderful image. There were a sort of few, they were Turkish, not or Greek, or they may be Cypriot, I'm not sure, cafes, but there wasn't a lot going on around here, as I recollect.
Church Street had one cafe at that point. It's so funny.
So it became a lot, I mean, later there was a lot of squatting. It was just starting then, I think. 70 probably Stoke Newington's counterculture was really just getting going. Yeah.
Because he was sidestepping the question here.
How long did the Commune last for? Or when did it close?
Not very long, about a year and a half. Or...
Really? So all of
Well,
that
I
was-
think other people moved in and...
Yeah, because I remember, because there was so many squats round here from like the late 70s. It was quite a kind of hotbed of people doing zines and kind of poetry and sort of bedsit culture. So it only lasted for a year and a half, and all of
Well, the house went on being used by different people.
Okay.
I think the creche, the nursery, was there for quite a lot longer after most of us had moved out. And the printing press was still there for a while. I'm not entirely sure.
Was it a squatted building?
No, we bought it. I think it was £1,400 or some princely sum, 5-storey house. Houses were dirt cheap in those days.
£1,400?
I think
It was a wreck. We had to wire it ourselves.
We redid the electricity, but all the same, 5 stories in Islington nowadays is...
So what happened to it in the end? Did it just kind of disintegrate? Or
It was compulsory purchase by the council on the grounds that the trains running along the back had wrecked or made it unsafe, or the building unsafe. However, to my knowledge, no other house was compulsory purchase, so I did wonder whether there was some other issue going on.
What number Grosvenor Avenue was it?
29.
29. It should have a blue plaque.
Well, yes, we're waiting for the blue plaque. It has been...
Wait on.
I think it's among the people who used 29 after the commune that you were involved with it evolved into, I guess. There was people who ran a lot of other projects. So Anarchy Magazine was run out of 29 for 7 or 8 years, I guess. There was various other groups who, mainly sort of anarchists, but on the kind of direct action anarchist side of things, merging into anarcho-feminism and other things, I guess. I think if it was compulsory purchased, I hadn't heard that, but there were council tenants in it in the late 80s. So it wasn't because it was structurally unsafe. It might have been targeted because it was politically unsafe. But
I think it was because nobody else was compulsory purchase.
And also the train track is miles away from the houses. That's miles. It's like there's a whole garden, and then the track.
Yes, no, it was ridiculous. But we'd all moved. We weren't terribly interested in the building by then, and so I don't think. Well, we sort of moved on. It was pity. We should have got more money for it had it not been compulsory purchased. Because prices were beginning to go up. But anyway.
I think some of the people who did Anarchy and that also lived at 37 later on as well, later in the 70s, so they moved along the street, and were still causing trouble. So.
I didn't quite catch that, but...
That brings us rather beautifully to the end because it's 9 o'clock. How amazing is that? Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
And for joining us and being here, with it being such a local story, and just really fantastic. And so such an honour to have you here. Thank you again so much. Cheers.
Thanks for organising us. And thanks, Stephen.